Okay, hello and welcome to Ethereum Classic Community Call number 9 on the 18th of January 2022. ETC Community Calls is a weekly voice chat that happens on the Ethereum Classic Community Discord server every Tuesday, usually at 1500 UTC. The content of these calls is decided by the ETC community. Each week anyone can submit questions and topic suggestions about anything related to Ethereum Classic. You can join the ETC Discord by visiting ethereumclassic.org/discord. This chat is held in the Community Calls channel. These calls are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and share. Today we're joined by special guest Cody Burns to discuss the ETC Multisig Community Fund, as well as various other topics related to Ethereum Classic. I've been collecting questions from the community this week and have a few lined up, but there will be opportunity later on to talk directly to Cody and ask questions if you're in the voice chat. Cody's joining us for 30 minutes this week, but we'll continue on afterwards to continue discussion. So, Cody, thanks for joining us. Hello, how are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Good to be back in ETC land.
That's great. So just for the listeners, first question is, who is Cody Burns? What's his backstory, and how does he relate to Ethereum Classic?
Sure. So, normal story, blockchain architect, innovator, MBA, entrepreneur. As far as ETC, I got involved with blockchain back in 2015 when Bitcoin was the first thing I was into. So really loved the ethos around it. The technology itself was really fascinating to me at the time. Ethereum was just starting to get its legs at that time. So the concept of being able to build smart contracts or have some code out there on the internet that you could interact with and execute, and you know what was executing, was just really cool. So I got deep into Ethereum, fell in love with it. Then the DAO hack happened, and it was just a weird time. So I definitely believed in the vision of ETC, of that you shouldn't be able to change what happened on the blockchain, and so helped with working the code out and working with the first ETC teams, getting everything built up, and having our own client. And so it was a fun time, a lot of learning.
Awesome.
Here we are, years later, doing doing AMAs still.
Yeah.
So pretty cool.
And what are some of the things you've done on ETC or with ETC? I know you were at some previous conferences speaking there, but in terms of building stuff, what have you been working on?
So it's been a long time since I've built anything on ETC, really. But so I guess my role's been mostly as an advisor to the different tech teams that have been kind of the stewards of ETC, whether it's the labs or ETC Dev or the co-op. So I sit on the board of the co-op and give guidance to Bob, I guess is the best way to describe it, if whenever he's looking for someone in the blockchain space to talk to. My day job is I'm an enterprise blockchain architect. So I build systems for large companies that are doing trade and track and trace or identity, or looking at how they can use this to better their business models.
Awesome. So let's jump into the community fund. And I guess from your perspective, I'm also kind of fuzzy on exactly what it is and where it came from. So could you give us a quick history of what exactly the Multisig Fund is? What should we be calling it? And what's the role that it was created for?
It's a good question. It's a weird history, I guess. So whenever the initial DAO split happened, there was a bunch of supporters for Ethereum Classic, and they all wanted to see it not die. So they everyone from mining pools to just different groups wanted to give money to the community of ETC so it could build out software, see projects come in, have infrastructure, and do all kinds of cool things. But there wasn't any good way to spend it. So there was an address on one of the first Ethereum Classic pages. So that address became a donation address. It was a single key address that one person held for the first 3 years, probably. And then ETC had its first big price spike back in 2017, maybe. So maybe it wasn't that long that one person held it. But anyway, the price spiked up. The funds were worth, I think, $300,000 at the time. And there was no good, clear path of how do we decide what's the project that we want to fund, or what's something that this money should go for, and how do we even find this anonymous person that's holding this key with all the money in it. So at the time, there was 5 people that were really active that weren't associated directly with any of the development teams. So not in the co-op, not working for ETC Dev. And so we all agreed that we would hold the keys. And at the time, we were waiting on a platform to be built out that was going to be kind of a play store for dApps or projects. They could stand up DAOs, but that project never came. So the keys just kind of got held since that time. And I don't think there's anything in place right now that would be a good way of managing grants or letting the community vote and have their voice on what that fund is or where those funds go.
Right, yeah. That is one of the tricky parts of this whole thing. And we'll get into some of the potential future use cases in a bit. With regards to the contract itself, is that a specific library that was used? Is it a custom multi-sig implementation? And how many signatures are required to spend the funds in there?
It was a standard contract at the time. Dexteran had done an audit of it, and that you should be able to find that somewhere on Google. If I remember correctly, it's 3 out of the 5 have to sign.
Okay, cool. And I guess one of the reasons that we're having this call is because previously it was brought up that it's been a while since it's been tested. And one of the questions that we got from the community was as follows. I think the main concern is whether the contract still works. Take one ETC out of the fund and then put it back or something. We trust the key holders.
I mean, it's kind of a loaded statement. Do we even know who all the key holders are anymore or where they're at? I mean, I'm still active in the community and I can name probably 2 or 3 of the other key holders, but I don't even know where all of them are, to be honest. So right. I mean, there's a lot of questions around, I guess, if the funds want to be used or.
Yeah, is there
is
there any reference to who the key holders were and how to potentially reach out to them, or at least get them to sign something?
Yeah, there was. I can look for it. I know Anthony had written an article whenever we had first decided to move to this multisig and discusses everybody that was involved.
Okay.
I think it was on Reddit, but I'm not sure.
3 out of 5, and I guess at least you can guarantee 2 of those are active. Getting 1 more is probably not going to be a big problem, I would imagine. So in terms of losing access, it's not really a worry.
Yeah, sure.
That's good to know. In terms of like going forward with this, and obviously as time progresses, more people might become inactive. Should there be some kind of system in place that rotates the key holders and make sure they're available such that we never do lose access to that?
I think the wallet that's deployed right now doesn't have the option to rotate key holders, but yeah, I think that's a good plan overall. But I think more the governance around what the funds get used for is probably a good topic to talk about. Right now, the people who are the key holders, they're not here. It's well, most of them aren't here, I guess is a good way of saying it. And maybe that's a good way to have it, of where they're unrelated, no one knows who they are. You'd have to go track them down, so it's harder to steal the funds maybe. But there needs to be something in place to get the funds used and make sure that it's going towards the right place, I think.
Yeah, I also agree with that.
Yeah, and I think making sure that you can update it as needed.
Updated as needed, as in the contract code itself, or?
Yeah, so the daily spend limits, who the actual owners are, being able to rotate those, even if it's based off of a vote of the other members or something like that.
Got it. I'm aware that some
usable.
There are some contracts like the Gnosis multisig, I believe, has some pretty good options in terms of like daily limits and that kind of stuff. So depending on the number of keys that are used to sign, the more or less can be withdrawn at any given time to add some extra security.
Yeah.
Do you have, as you were there during the early formation of this thing, was there any sort of indication of what the funds were supposed to be used for going forward? And was the idea to speculate on the price of ETC as well?
Not that I can remember. I don't think there was a clear direction. Whenever we had set this up, it was going to be, we were holding the funds in this wallet until a system was built where the community could vote on projects. Like I said, the original project fell through and then no one ever picked up and carried on. about that time, the labs came around and said, "We don't need the money. We have our own money. We'll build out our own systems." So there wasn't a big push for, "Hey, we need this. We need to fund projects."
Rolal, did you want to jump in there?
Yes, I remember you saying that at some point um, dev a dev team needed funds, but there wasn't any mechanism for helping them fund and support the team.
Yeah. So ETC dev team famously ran out of money at one point during this, and then it got sold out to the labs and caused that whole unraveling. And we had money sitting in the community fund, but there wasn't a clear path of what the money should be used for or how to get it out to give it to the team to support them, or even if that was a worthwhile reason to use the money to support the core dev team, which looking back is pretty terrible. One of our main development teams went out of business pretty much, and we had funds sitting there that could have saved them.
Very interesting. It sounds similar to the Treasury debate in a way.
Yeah, and the funds themselves, once we took it out of the single person holding the key to all of them, we took the address down off all the websites, and it was really just kind of held as a savings for whenever the community did get to a place where they could spend it. So that's why there's not active contributions. But whenever it was active, there was money going in, and mining pools were putting money towards it. So there's definitely interest in supporting the community.
Okay, so let's say it seems like in order to unlock those funds, it would make sense to have some kind of structure in place that allowed the community in some way to vote on what things make sense to spend money on. And one obvious structure for that would be some kind of DAO. Did you have any thoughts on how a DAO might be structured for this kind of thing?
No, but it does seem like the thing that DAOs are fit for, and it would be pretty ironic if a DAO is what ended up saving Ethereum Classic after it's what created it in the first place. But this is 2022. It's not 2016 where all the code was new and everything was the Wild West. There's plenty of DAOs out there now that have funding strategy and business models built around them. So it's definitely something that I think could be pursued. There's platforms out there to support it, and everything seems like it's kind of in place.
Yeah, I think in terms of libraries that could be used, there's a lot more mature options than there used to be, for sure. The biggest problem, I think, though, with any DAO is deciding who gets to vote and the initial seeding of responsibility. So how might that work, do you think?
You mean with community fund wallet going into it, or just in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could start a DAO from fresh and have people like donate ETC in order to get voting rights, but then that doesn't really use the existing funds. So how do you foresee making a structure that's fair for the community and also allowing people to have input?
I don't know. I haven't put much thought around it, I guess. I'm sure it'd be possible to just donate all the money and not have a voting share to another contract. Just set up a function where it can go in with no voting rights. But I think I guess fundamentals around the DAO would have to be worked out of how much goes toward crowd sale or how much comes from just the treasury going to it, and how much funds can be spent at one and for what reasons. So yeah, I think a DAO would be a good path, but there's some thought that needs to be put around it.
Yeah, I'm a good guy to reach out to for that. I'll probably detail some of that later next week.
Perfect, thanks. There might also be called time after this 30 minutes to bring that up as well to discuss.
A question that I have regarding the community fund. Would you agree that vote delegation could speed up the use of funds and maybe seeing results?
You mean as far as just getting money out to projects that need it?
Yes. Yes.
Vote. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the biggest problem is there's no way to really represent the community voice. I mean, do you spend $100,000 off a Twitter poll, or is it a new project shows up and say, "Hey, I have this great idea," and we say, "Here, take all the money." We've just been holding it for years.
Yeah,
and then I guess it's how much to which project. So I mean, there's a lot of questions around it, and that's probably why it's never been used as kind of a piggy bank.
Yeah, I would also be
The
cautious about. I would also be cautious about um, having everything go into any one solution like a DAO, and it would make more sense, I think, to like incrementally test things slowly. And if things break, it's not like game over.
one idea that I had was that the community fund could be first spent in a way that would make software audit possible. So you build a mechanism that will verify what comes after it.
I mean, but we have the environment's also a little different now. The co-op exists. I mean, the funds could all just be given to the co-op, and they do transparent financing. It seems like they would have everything in place that would be needed for funding projects and be able to give out money legally. So I guess the question is, what's the benefit of doing it on the blockchain?
That's a good point. Did you have any thoughts about the idea of having some kind of fund that's dedicated purely for minimum client maintenance, such that ETC can guarantee that at least one client will be like developed for X number of years?
I don't know. That's a tricky question. How much does it cost to fund one client for X number of years? Eventually, we're going to run out of the time where the upstream geth is still supported, or Besu operates the way that it does now. So at some point, it's Ethereum Classic's going to have to either build their own client or just accept that nothing else is coming from upstream and continue maintaining it. So for now, the co-op has all the developers again, so they're all under one building, and it seems like funding there is pretty set for a while. I guess the big question is, is there a point in funding multiple clients? Do we need 3 clients or 4 clients? Or just go with the Bitcoin model of having one and the other clients are nice, but if they don't match with the one true version of Bitcoin D, then you're just out of sync. So Ethereum Classic could do the same thing and say, this is our version of multi-geth. If you either use it or you're just not on Ethereum Classic. That's also a reasonable approach, I think. I don't think we have the means to support 3 different clients.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. The Bitcoin model seems like a successful one to emulate. On I guess the topic of future maintenance, do you see, I guess after the merge, how long do you think Ethereum Classic should attempt to maintain full compatibility with Ethereum, and in what way do you think there should be some kind of disconnect?
I think in the next couple years, Ethereum Classic is going to have a lot of challenges, and it's been good to be associated with the mainnet Ethereum for now. I mean, I guess, but I think being Ethereum Classic also carries a lot of baggage. I mean, there's a lot of blockchains that have come up from nothing to top 10 blockchains in the time that Ethereum Classics existed, and there's always been kind of, I guess, you have to choose sides between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So rebranding might be a good thing at some point for ETC. But as far as how long pulling in new features from Ethereum development itself is going to work, I mean, as long as they support the original client, it's still possible, but it's just not that exciting. I mean, there's got to be a reason for the blockchain to exist other than it's 6 years ago we made a decision not to do one hard fork.
Yep, that makes sense. And I think part of that is maintaining the narrative of Cody's Law and all the good things that we're here for. I'm going to ask one more pre-aligned question, and due to time, I will then open up for everyone else if they want to jump in. But just to kind of wrap a few together, what do you, if you could write a roadmap for Ethereum Classic right now, what would be things on the horizon for you?
Money was no object, and we had all the talent and technology in the world. The biggest problem I think that Ethereum Classic has is the size of the blockchain itself. So doing something like recursive snarks, like there's a project called Mina that their entire blockchain stays 22 kilobytes, and I think that's huge in the future. Being able to validate the past transactions without having to carry the weight of standing up a server that has 300, 400 gigs worth of just data that you're never going to use. That would be a big one. Moving from the dev P2P wire protocol to lib P2P, so something more in line with IPFS and the wider distributed system stack would be something on the list. And what else? I don't know, raising the price it costs to deploy contracts would probably be my third if I had to pick. So that the reduce bloat by just making it expensive to deploy contracts.
Cool, thanks for that. Any thoughts on versioning?
You mean as far as the EVM versioning, so you could tell when code was deployed and what rules it should operate under? I think that would be a good thing to have in ETC. If you look at newer blockchains that are coming out, Polkadot has the same concept of versioning or runtime engines as contracts are deployed. So it's definitely good for future proofing.
That's great, thanks. And with the last few minutes, would anyone else like to pose any questions? The floor's open.
I have a few questions, not really related to ETC, but the blockchain industry.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we see digital retail companies are starting using blockchain for food traceability purposes. Will this trend continue for other products?
You mean track and trace products for their supply chains?
Yes.
Digital twins?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sold on the value of using tokens for track and trace. You create other problems whenever you do this. You have a new source where you have to audit. So there's no real good way to tie physical objects to digital objects. And as you move things through the supply chain, there's diminishing returns on once you hit certain scales. So if you're doing 1 million widgets coming out of a factory and each one's serialized and they're moving through the system, there's value in tracking them while they're moving if you can trade them with other people. But once they reach the warehouse, you have to break open cartons and verify that all the data is there. So you can only really track things at the level that you can validate them at. And so I don't know, it's a tricky balance of what you can validate on chain and what you can track, and what's better just left, I guess, to systems as they are now. So whenever I order a package from Amazon, it doesn't do me any good to track it on a blockchain because it's going to the post office and I can see it all the way to my house. It's a point-to-point sale. So there's not many markets out there where you have Walmart, Target, and Toys R Us all buying from the same suppliers, and they can buy from each other in transit also. So it's very niche markets.
Thank you. Another question.
I guess to be on a more positive note on that, the things I do see that have value in the track and trace are the items where there are disputes. So purchase orders, being able to send messages about purchase orders and financial instruments and invoices, being able to track those through a system is pretty huge.
How much has the industry grown, and how are private networks evolving comparing to open public networks, in your opinion?
From what I've seen, all blockchain consortiums seem to be running into the same problem with the private networks of they develop something, they build it on Ethereum Enterprise or Hyperledger Fabric or Corda. They get their initial partners in that they've always been working with. They agree to the rules and terms. And then they always have the problem with hitting the next level of scale, of getting more people to join their network or attaching themselves to another network. So until they can overcome that problem of business being business, I mean, there's a reason that we have multiple corporations and they all have their own supply chain and they all have their own contracts, is because they're private. And that's how they want to stay. They want to keep their deals. They want to keep everything that they do private. That is possible through the network, but it's not to the point yet where they get enough increased value by doing these networks that it makes it that much better than the traditional systems that they've been using. So there are are improvements being made, but it's not something that's going to be overnight the next 3 years or so. It's over time, companies will start shifting to this model, but it requires reaching a certain threshold of value for everyone involved in the network.
Thank you.
Just one more ETC related question, if you have time.
Yeah, shoot.
Okay, I wanted to get your impressions on the current state of the debate with regards to the Treasury, i.e. the protocol layer Treasury, and whether or not you can see a future version of that you would be comfortable with implementing into Ethereum Classic. What might that look like?
It seems I guess I haven't checked in a while. I thought the Treasury had died and everyone had moved on.
So there was a withdrawal announcement, but within the announcement, I believe ETC Co-op still believe that a Treasury needs to happen, and they are planning a future proposal for that. So,
I mean, I would be supportive. I think funding's a pretty key thing. Like earlier in this call, we talked about ETC needs some client. There's some work that needs to be done, and everyone using the system should probably understand that there has to be a team on the other side of it. It's open source software, but that doesn't mean that it's free and that people's time isn't valuable. So being able to fund that is definitely should be on everyone's radar. And whether that comes through something at the protocol level with the Treasury, or whether that's a DAO that gets stood up, or just everyone donating to the co-op, the nonprofit, and keeping it going. But yeah, I would definitely be supportive of a Treasury in the future. Cool. Yeah, I need to drop for another call, but definitely want to keep talking about this next week. Happy to be back.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cody.
Cool.
Really appreciate your time.
Well, we'll talk to everyone later.
And yep, take care. See you again soon. Bye-bye. Okay, so I guess let's jump into the open discussion. If anyone wants to contribute any suggestions, comments, what do you think of that? Please go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to ask to Cody, but he left already, since he's quite old with EDC. But Istora, what's not asking some insider information, but your own feeling that after this April, will Grayscale keep funding co-op, or there are some chances, or it's 0% or some percent chances that they will continue funding co-op, or it's just no more?
Well, as that question was directed at me, I would say it's not a 0% chance. I have no idea what Grayscale are thinking at the moment, but I mean, hopefully they continue. It could be that if by April comes we get some kind of DAO together, maybe that is another option in terms of funding. But yeah, I'm really not the person to ask. Maybe there's someone else on the call that knows more than me.
Bob Somerville stated very clear that the agreement with the Grayscale ends in April, and that's it. There's no talk about continuing or making a new agreement till now.
Okay, so then another question, if Istora you can reflect on. So, what's for example, you have been writing quite good articles about ETC. So, what you are thinking, what kind of treasury model is workable, since this IUHK's proposal was very aggressively rejected. Of course, it deserved to be rejected. But what is kind of you can say the middle ground? Did you try to, in your brain, are you have you reached some conclusion? Not conclusion, but some points which could be agreed by several different groups, some aggressive and moderate groups that can be worked on regarding trade.
I think a very good place to start would be some kind of DAO structure. Whether or not there's a protocol level treasury, which, for the record, I'm against, I think, and I haven't fully thought about this, but it somewhat depends on the proposal itself. But anything that includes a dev tax, I'm fairly sure that I would be opposed to. Because I think there's probably other opportunities that need to be attempted first, such as using the community fund. for example. But I think definitely having a DAO in place as a first step would then open up to potential experimentation with a protocol level thing. But in order to do that, first you need a DAO. So we should definitely be doing that first. My hope is that maybe we can get something before the end of before April, before ETC co-ops funding is cut off, and maybe provide an alternative for that. Because I think with a DAO, a lot of super low-hanging fruit can be funded that's otherwise not on the radar of ETC co-op, or isn't something that they would typically be funding, right? And having a proposal system that allows anyone to request funding would potentially open up a much more diverse and good value for money spending, as well as the essential stuff like client maintenance. So yeah, I'd have to judge. Sorry, go ahead.
Don, what do you think of a dev fee on mining, or something like what Grin did, which is a fair use contribution?
When you say fee, would that be a voluntary donation or a protocol change such that X percentage of fee is taken from the block reward?
Well, the fair use would be voluntary, and a dev fee would be a change to the blockchain.
Yeah, in the article, Let's Keep Ethereum Classic, I did mention a few options that I think would be totally compatible. One of which was a by default on donation based in the clients, and because it's completely voluntary, it's like not a problem. It's not going to cause a hard fork. So I just think there's tons of things that should be tried before making drastic changes, and that might even include just issuing like NFTs or other forms of raising funds.
Okay.
One thing that was
thanks for the
mentioned earlier
answer.
this week was that with the whole SHA-3 potential change, there is quite a big incentive for miners that are invested in SHA-3 to contribute to Ethereum Classic, right? Because it increases the value of their hardware. So if you can lock in capital via hardware, you also potentially lock in contributions to developing the protocol in a way that I think is pretty similar to Bitcoin. To put my position
Yeah.
like most straightforwardly, I think we should do what Bitcoin does, and whatever that is, we should try and emulate.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your answer. So on SHA-3, there isn't a lot of hardware out there. It's mostly FPGAs and GPUs right now when you take analysis of the other networks that are on SHA-3.
Yep, that's true. There's just no real massive incentive to create those ASICs at the moment because those networks, as far as I understand, are not like super profitable to mine.
That's correct. It really depends on profitability and ETC's wherewithal to build more system security.
We can agree that Ether moves to proof of stake. It's just time consuming for ETC. Best scenario is to wait to see what happens, and maybe then have something ready for development, like a DAO, and see from there what if SHA-3 is an option or not.
Yeah, the first thing that I'm gonna work on after the launch of the website by the end of this week, end of this month, is DAO. I think that's the next thing that we need. So it's not super complicated to deploy something that already exists. So I think we should just do that and see what happens. Basically, the big question though is how to seed the original like owners of the DAO, and how is the structure of that going to work? Ideally, there'd be some kind of like a Sybil resistant registration process where somewhat trusted members of the community can apply and be approved based on their contributions to the Discord channel, for example. And if they've been on one of these calls, then you get a vote, right? But then there'd also need to be a way to raise funds, and also ideally done in a way that is not security and is potentially legally risky.
having co-op as a legal company, a charity company, would could make the process way easier, in my opinion.
I think if the funding is done in a way that there's no dividend, there's no way to make money back off the DAO, then I don't think there's any risk in any place. The only problem is if it is something that you invest with the hope of getting returns from, then I'm pretty sure that would be iffy on the legal front. So it's how do you get funds whilst also not having an incentive to really donate apart from the good of Classic? Or maybe it's just like a reputational thing.
I wanted to ask you guys to reflect, for example, post-merge, uh, there will be a lot of hash, for example, in ETH. So no matter how big maybe 10, I think recently somebody was quoting that we are 10x in terms of hash rate than we were when we were 51% attacked. So, but there is a huge hash rate which will be available. So is there some danger that ETC would be attacked again, or there are some contingency plans that could be worked on, just in just for example, just to be proactive?
Yeah, I made a suggestion previously that it's probably a good idea to, around the time that we know the merge is going to happen, request or suggest to exchanges to increase the number of confirmations that they require as a means to protect them from replay attacks. From double spends. So it would make it much more risky and improbable of success, such that 51% attacks are kind of too expensive and too low risk reward ratio to bother doing. There's also please go ahead.
Don, I was going to say that's from a high level that works, but when we delve down a number, you'll see that the majority GPUs become unprofitable. I think that we did some economic analysis and showed that maybe 20%, when you get down to 20% of the GPUs from Ethereum coming over, no one makes any money mining. So the incentive then is, if you have stranded hardware, you'll try and recoup some of your cost. And the way that you may recoup some of your cost is to either dump your hardware, because there is no other GPU network out there that's capable of providing profits to miners, or you mount an attack, or you do something more nefarious, or you create your own network that uses the GPUs. The ASICs are a little bit tougher from that standpoint that they're basically hard-coded to ETH hash and ETC hash.
You could always, another option is to mine ETC honestly and shill the coin in the hope that the price goes up. Like you could speculate on ETC basically. But yeah, I do see the risk.
Yeah, the problem is that the miners have to pay for power. So, you only hoard for so long before you have to, pay for your power contracts.
One question that bugs me about Ether's miners is the fact that they bought equipment starting in 2020, like just a very high ASICs, and they did this knowing that Ethereum would move to proof of stake. So it seems just weird that they are now wondering what to do with their equipment. Maybe they want to keep Ether 1.
Well, there was always the potential that Ethereum would continue delaying. I mean, judging by past trends, they were supposed to launch proof of stake many years ago. So it's not really unreasonable that miners assumed that it would be delayed further. And yeah, there is a potential. I believe there's already a project that was attempting to continue Ethereum mainnet on proof of work. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I believe there's a group of miners that were trying to do that anyway. The problem, though, is that all of the value in the form of DeFi would be following the proof of stake chain as opposed to the proof of work chain, and I'm not sure if it would have much value if they mined it. Whatever happens, it's going to be an extremely interesting sort of experiment in blockchain. It will be a historical moment, and whatever happens is going to be very educational.
In a fork, you'd also strand your 2.0 residuals.
Could you repeat that? Sorry, Henry. Could you say that again?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, got you.
Okay. What I said was that if there were a chain split led by those miners, then the residual part that is attributed to 2.0 would also be stranded because they'd have to create a 2.0 chain for their new 1.0 chain.
Yeah, I'm not fully to grips with exactly what is involved in the 2.0 switch, but would they not just be able to abandon the 2.0 residual entirely and just continue whatever like old version pre-merge was running? Obviously, delay the difficulty bomb if there is one.
That's correct, but you basically burn for the equivalent of it'd be equivalent of stranding or burning whatever's left, whatever part of that chain is attributed to 2.0.
I see. So in a way, the people that don't move their funds over before the merge at least have the option of running on the 1.0 chain if it does continue proof of work, whereas people that have sent their stuff over do not have that option. I wanted to pick up on a point that was made during the call about versioning and this idea of having multiple different versions of the EVM running at the same time based on when a contract was deployed, because this, I think, is something that is going to add a lot of value to Ethereum Classic and make it a lot easier to do upgrades in the future, and is something that basically has no downsides and only upsides. One of the issues right now is that if something like a gas repricing that happened in the Mystique fork doesn't change the way contracts operate, but can price certain things out in terms of transactions if it goes above the gas limit, for example, and also may not make certain opcodes economic sense anymore. And there is a precedent that changing those things for the sake of making the protocol stable is kind of like maintenance that is acceptable in terms of maintaining Cody's law, but it is a sort of like not fully black and white depending on what exactly is changed in terms of gas price. So having a method of versioning different contracts based on the block number would mean that future gas price changes and other changes could be completely backwards compatible and would have no effect on any like Cody's law question. And it would also make, I believe, future upgrades easier to do because you have to worry less about messing with old contracts that have already been deployed. So for me, this seems like a very nice next thing to have for Ethereum Classic that we could do as soon as possible, really, because it will make all future upgrades easier. And it's something that everyone can get behind, unlike Treasury or SHA-3 or something that's controversial potentially, because really there's no downside. And it'd be a nice win for the community that everyone can rally behind.
Is this update going in Mystic hard fork?
Versioning? No, this is still just an ECIP. The Mystique hard fork is just two very minor changes. So, but yeah, the one that I mentioned earlier in terms of the gas price change is one of them.
Okay.
Basically, there is an opcode called self-destruct, which returns all of the gas that was used to mine that contract in what is basically a poor decision from a protocol standpoint, because it removes the incentive. Well, basically you can spam the chain almost for free because you get refund of gas if you use self-destruct, and it's been exploited by certain contracts called gas tokens, and this update will reduce the amount of gas you get in return for that self-destruct. So it kind of changes the economics of the contract. The contract still operates in the same way, but because it was essentially exploiting a flaw in the protocol, it will kind of change a little bit. Okay, so if there's no further comments or questions, we can wrap up. Does anyone want to add anything? Okay.
No.
Okay then. So just 2 quick points before we wrap up. From now on, we'll be creating a new thread in each call 1 week before it starts, so it's easy to contribute questions if you're in the Discord, and we can focus discussion on the call. You'll be able to find those threads in the community calls notes channel. So each call will have its own thread there. We are also looking for volunteers to help us with approving content on the ETC website. To maintain quality assurance, each change to the website requires the approval of 3 moderators, which can sometimes take several days to coordinate if they aren't all online at the same time. We want to be able to reduce this time to less than a day if possible, so we need some more mods to help out. It's easy work, mostly just spot checking new apps and other content submitted by other users via pull requests. If you have a GitHub account and would like to help out, then just shoot me a DM on Discord and we can set you up, and yeah, that would be helpful to the community. So that concludes this week's call. Thank you to those who contributed questions and for listening and sharing. If we didn't cover something you'd like to discuss, you can always submit your own questions in the community calls channel, and we can bring it up in a future talk. Hope to see you all again next week. Thanks, bye-bye.